Hello, my name is Florian and I welcome you to IT Tech Tips. In the last episode, we've installed everything we need so we can install the Active Directory in this episode. That's what we're going to do today, installing an Active Directory in our AcmeNet, and I will give you some background information of how the Active Directory works together with the DNS Server and the DHCP Server. Let's have a look. For the configuration of our domain controller on Acme-DC01, we will need all of the systems in our lab running. If they're not running yet, make sure you start them up, beginning with Acme-Router, wait about 5 minutes, then Acme-DC01, wait another few minutes, and then start both of the clients. The whole process of installing the domain controller will take quite some time, so make sure you have a nice cup of coffee ready. After all systems are running, go to Acme-DC01 Server Manager and click on Manage, add roles and feature as we did before multiple times. Click Next on the first page. On the third page, make sure that Acme-DC01 is selected, click Next and choose Active Directory Domain Services. In the pop-up window, you will see the additional roles and features which are about to be installed. If you would not have pre-configured the DNS server in the last video, there will be also the DNS server in this list. Make sure you have the checkbox selected in Include Management Tools and choose Add Features. Click Next. Scroll through the list if you like to see what's going on, and then click Next. And as always, I suggest you read through this page. There's a statement that the Active Directory requires a working DNS server in your network, which we already have. There's also a mention of the Azure Active Directory Service, in short AAD, which we will not go into now, but in one of the future series where we're going to modernize our lab environment. For the moment, click Next and select Restart the destination server if necessary. Choose Yes on the appearing pop-up prompt and then select Install. The installation will take some time, and after it's complete you will see a yellow exclamation mark at the top of the window, which we will click and select Promote this server to a domain controller. In this wizard you have three options. You can add a domain controller to an existing domain, which we do not have. You can add a new domain to an existing forest, which we also don't have. Or you can add a new forest. The forest is the top level which can contain multiple domains. So we're going to create a new forest with one domain in it. So select the third option, add a new forest. And then you have to specify the domain name. It's considered to be best practice to choose a domain name which has a publicly registered DNS zone. So for example, yourcompany.com. Then the domain could be mydomain.yourcompany.com. In many environments I've seen administrators create a private zone like yourcompany.local or yourcompany.internal, because in large environments this can cause a headache when connecting this directory to another directory or a public service. But in this lab case, you can just enter what I am entering here, because we will stay within our lab environment anyway. Make sure you don't have any typos here and enter acmecorp.it-tech-tips.com. it-tech-tips.com is a publicly registered DNS name, and Acme Corp will be our domain name for our internal lab environment. After that, click Next. And here you have to enter a password for the DSRM, which is the Directory Services Restore mode. We are hopefully not going to have to use that, because you will use that if your Active Directory has a serious problem and you have to restore it from a backup. We're going to enter our default lab password here, which is password with a capital P, a capital W, the number 0 for the letter O, and an exclamation mark at the end. And at the top of the window you will notice that the forest function level and the domain function level are at Windows Server 2016. Why 16? We have installed a Windows Server 2019. That's because the Active Directory has not undergone any changes by Microsoft between Windows Server 2016 and 2019. You can click on the drop-down to see the available options, but please keep it at Windows Server 2016, which is the newest available version. Then click Next. And on this window you will see a warning. You can ignore that and click Next. I will explain it in a few moments. And you will see that the wizard automatically suggests a NetBIOS domain name, which is sort of speak a short version of the whole domain name we've entered in one of the previous pages. We keep it at Acme Corp, it's a good short name, and click Next. In this window you will have to select folders for storing the whole directory stuff on the file system. The database, the log files, and the sysvol folder, which will contain login scripts and stuff like that. We will have a closer look at that in the future videos. Just keep it at the default and select Next. Here you can review your selections. They should be okay. Click Next. And then some prerequisite checks are performed by the wizard. The first warning is more of an information than an actual warning, which says basically that systems which are 20 years old will not be able to connect to the Active Directory. I think that's okay, we can ignore this warning. The second warning is the one I told you a few seconds ago I'm going into. That's because we are doing a completely new setup and we do not have a DNS zone configured yet. Remember when we set up the DNS server, we clicked on the Forward-Lookup zones and the list was empty. If there had been a Forward-Lookup zone called it-tech-tips.com, then this warning here would not appear. But since we did not create that zone, this warning appears. We can safely ignore it. You can scroll down to see the other information and then click on Install. This will take quite some time, and after the installation and configuration is complete, the server will do an automatic reboot. You will notice that the reboot is taking considerably more time than before we have installed the domain controller. That's because there are much more checks necessary when booting the server than before when it has not been a domain controller yet. After the boot has been completed, you will notice in the login prompt that now we have this Acme Corp /administrator. Before we've installed our domain controller, it was just administrator. And now we have this domain administrator. So if there's a domain name /username, it's a domain user. The setup wizard created this default administrator user account with the same credentials the local administrator had on this server. So it's also password, so the same password than you had for your local administrator. Use this password to log in and wait a few moments until everything has started before continuing with this video. Alright, now that you have installed the Active Directory domain controller on our Acme-TC01, let's play around a little bit with it just to get a better understanding of what was going on in the DNS server. Open the DNS Server Manager. And you will notice that we still do not have a Reverse-Lookup zone, but in the Forward-Lookup zones we have two entries. one of which is our domain, acmecorp.it-tech-tips.com, and the other one contains internal stuff for the Active Directory. In the Acme Corp zone, you will notice that we have an entry for our acme-dc01. So if a client wants to connect to our acme-dc01, it will ask the DNS server, hey, what's the IP address of acme-dc01? And the DNS server will return 192.168.77.20. And that's how the clients can connect to our Active Directory server by using its name, acme-dc01. If you click on the Windows logo and choose Run and enter NSLookup, you may notice that you got a really strange looking IP address for our DNS server, which is column 1. You might have expected 192.168.77.20 or 127.0.0.1. But for some reason, NSLookup has decided to use the IP version 6 address of the DNS server, which is installed locally, and column 1 is the same as 127.0.0.1, just for IP version 6. So just for fun, enter acme-dc01 in here, and here you get the IP address which we've expected and which we've seen in our zone Acme Corp. So this seems to be working. You can enter exit to exit this command prompt. Let's try something else. Choose Run and Command, CMD, enter NSLookup and the IP address of acme-dc01. You will notice that this will time out and will not return a result. So why is that? The normal case would be that you enter a host name, acme-dc01, and you expect an IP address in return. This is also called a forward NSLookup, and we have a forward lookup zone configured in our DNS server. What we did when providing an IP address and expecting a name in return is called a reverse NSLookup. But if you remember, we do not have any reverse lookup zones configured yet. That's what we're going to do, so the reverse lookups work as well. Go back to the DNS manager, right click on the reverse lookup zones, choose New Zone. Next on the first window, here you see that we want to create a primary zone. Please read the description. And we want to keep the checkbox Store in Active Directory checked. That means that in the future, if we had multiple DNS servers in the Active Directory, that this zone would be automatically replicated, which makes the life of a server administrator a lot easier. So make sure it's at primary zone and the checkbox is checked, and then click Next. If we had multiple DNS servers, we want this reverse lookup zone to be replicated between all DNS servers within our Acme Corp domain. Keep it at that and select Next. And here you can choose the type of the reverse lookup zone. We will create the IP version 4 reverse lookup zone. Click Next and enter the IP address of the network, which is 192.168.77. Notice that in the bottom of the window, the 3 numbers you've entered will be written in a reversed order, which is a neat thing because we're talking about reverse lookup zones. This is just a naming convention which is nicely implemented in this wizard. After you've entered the IP, click Next, and on this page you will be asked whether you want to allow dynamic updates of this zone. This is a nice feature of an Active Directory environment, because if a client gets a new IP address from a DHCP server, the dynamic updates will allow the client to dynamically update this IP address for its client's name, in our case, for example, acme-client01 in the DNS server. so the other clients can more easily connect to another client. So keep it at only allow secure dynamic updates and then click next. Choose finish. And there you have an almost empty reverse lookup zone. Almost empty because there are always two entries in a DNS zone, one for the start of authority and the other one for the name server responsible for this zone. But we still do not have an entry for our acme-dc01 host. There are two ways to create an entry. The more complicated way is to create it manually, but we are taking the easy way by going to the forward lookup zone, choosing the properties of acme-dc01 and just checking the checkbox at update associated pointer record. A pointer record is just an entry in a reverse lookup zone. Somebody came up with the name pointer record, I don't know why, but check this checkbox, click OK, and navigate to our reverse lookup zone. There's no entry visible yet. That's because the interface is not updated. Right-click in an empty space and choose refresh. And here you are. Let's test this configuration. Go back to the command prompt where a few moments ago we performed the reverse lookup, which failed, and redo the reverse lookup. Hit enter and now you see that you get the host name back, acme-dc01 with the whole domain string at the end. So our configuration was successful. There's one more thing we have to do before we can finally join our clients to the domain. When we've ran the setup wizard for our Active Directory domain controller, the wizard recognized that we have a DHCP server installed locally on the same server, and the DHCP server was deactivated. This is expected behavior. It's a safety feature to make sure that there are not multiple DHCP servers in one Active Directory domain environment which might not be synchronized. So in our case we only have one and we can just simply reactivate it. Otherwise the clients would not be able to connect to the DHCP server and therefore not to the network and therefore not be able to join the domain in the next video. So go to the DHCP server manager, open it up, and here you will notice that there are two tiny little red arrows looking down, which means that the DHCP server is deactivated. To reactivate it, right-click on the DHCP server and choose Authorize. And that will authorize the DHCP server in this domain environment. After you've chosen Authorize, you will see no immediate change. That's because, again, the interface is not automatically updated. For that, you have to right-click on it and choose Refresh. And now you will notice that we have two nice little green filled circles, which means everything's good. Just to double check, go to the scope and check the address pool, it's still here, and the address leases are also still here. Our two clients we're going to join to the Active Directory in the next episode. And in the scope options we still have our DNS server and the router for accessing the internet. So everything is fine here and we are ready to join the clients in the next episode to the domain. You now have a working Active Directory set up. Congratulations! At the moment the Active Directory doesn't really do anything, so in the next episode we're going to join the clients to the Active Directory so you can see how all comes together. If you don't want to miss the episode, stay tuned, subscribe and ring the bell. See you next time.